Speaking is something we do without even thinking about it, right? It just feels natural. But the story of how we actually learn language, how a tiny baby goes from making noises to having full-blown conversations, well, that's one of the biggest, most fascinating debates in all of science. So let's dive into that incredible journey. So that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, how does it happen? Does a baby's brain start out as a total blank slate, just waiting for the world to write on it? Or are we born with some kind of language program already installed? For a long, long time, the answers to that question were on completely opposite ends of the spectrum. For a huge chunk of the 20th century, the answer seemed pretty straightforward. Thanks to influential thinkers like B.F. Skinner, the dominant theory was that our minds are, in fact, blank slates. And language? It's something we learn completely through experience and, well, a whole lot of repetition. Okay, so this whole idea has a name: behaviorism. And the core principle is that learning isn't really about what's going on inside your head, thinking and all that. Nope, it's just about changing your behavior based on what's happening around you. Your environment literally writes the rules onto your mind. So how does this actually work? How does the world write on this blank slate? It all comes down to a simple little loop called conditioning. Imagine a parent holds up an apple and says apple. That's the stimulus. The child tries to say apple, that's the response. And then the parent gets all excited and says, yes, that's it, good job. That's the positive reinforcement. You just do that thousands and thousands of times, and boom, you formed a language habit. And believe me, this idea completely took over the classroom. If you've ever had a language class where you had to do endless drills, memorize dialogues over and over, and just repeat, well, you've seen behaviorism in action. The student was seen as this passive bucket, and the teacher's job was to just pour the knowledge in and get rid of any mistakes before they turned into bad habits. But then everything changed. In the late 1950s, this linguist named Noam Chomsky came along and basically said, hold on a minute. He argued that this whole blank slate idea was missing the single most important part of the equation: the amazing, active, creative human mind. And this set up a massive showdown, really. You had behaviorism, which saw learning as this outside-in process. It's all just imitation from the world. But Chomsky's theory, which came to be known as mentalism, just flipped that script completely. He said, no. Language is an inside-out process. It's driven by a program that's already in our brains from day one. See, Chomsky's big aha moment was noticing that kids are just wildly creative. They say things they've absolutely never heard an adult say, like, I go to the store, or my foots are cold. They're not just copying what they hear, they're figuring out the rules of grammar and then applying them, sometimes incorrectly, but they're applying them. And behaviorism, which was all about imitation, had no way to explain this creative explosion. So Chomsky came up with this pretty radical idea, the language acquisition device, or LAD for short. The best way to think of it is like a pre-installed operating system for language that every single human is born with. It doesn't have the words for English or Spanish or Japanese, but it has the fundamental rules, the universal grammar, that are the foundation for all human languages. Okay, so how would this language device even work in practice? Well, the theory goes something like this. First, it's already got those universal rules baked in. Second, when a baby starts hearing a language, any language, it's like turning on the computer. The device gets activated. And finally, the device starts analyzing the language it's hearing, matching the local patterns to its built-in universal principles. And that's how a child can figure out the specific grammar of their native language so incredibly fast. Chomsky basically kicked off a revolution, right? But the story doesn't end there. The whole conversation started to shift away from this simple nature versus nurture fight. It became a more interesting question. What is the active role the learner is playing in all of this? And this, right here, was the next giant leap. Whether we call it cognitivism or constructivism, the new core idea was that the learner is not passive at all. They're not an empty jar to be filled, and they're not just a pre-programmed machine. No, the learner is an active participant who is constantly thinking, organizing, and building their own understanding of the world. So this new active learner idea kind of branched off into two main paths. On one side, you've got cognitivism, which often uses the analogy of the mind as a computer. It's all about how we process information, how we select it, transform it, and store it away in our memory. But then you have constructivism, which takes it a step further. It says we're not just processing information. We're like architects, actively building brand new knowledge on top of our past experiences. One of the giants in this field was the psychologist Jean Piaget, and he argued that our ability to learn isn't the same our whole lives. It actually develops in distinct stages as we grow up. As you can see here, we start out as babies, learning through our senses. Then our thinking gets more and more complex, until eventually, as adults, we can handle abstract ideas and formal logic.
But here's a cool little twist. Not all constructivists agreed on how we build. On the left, you have Piaget's idea, which saw the learner as a kind of solo architect, figuring out the world on their own. But on the right, another key thinker, Vygotsky, had a different take. He said we are social builders. For him, knowledge isn't built alone. It's co-constructed with other people through conversation and interaction.
Okay, so let's take a step back and look at the whole journey here. When you zoom out, you can see this incredible arc. Our entire idea of what a learner even is has been totally transformed over the past 100 years or so. I mean, look at this evolution. It's amazing. We went from seeing the learner as a passive blank slate to an innate programmer, born with the software ready to go. Then that idea evolved into the learner as an active information processor, and finally, to the learner as an active builder, an architect of their own knowledge. So if there's one single thing to take away from all this, it's this. The entire history of this debate has been a journey toward empowering the learner. We've shifted from seeing learning as this passive thing that's done to a person to an active process, something that a person does for themselves. So I'll leave you with this question. Think about the way you really learn things. Are you just repeating and forming habits, or are you actively building new ideas, connecting them to what you already know and who you're talking to? Really thinking about that might just change the way you see learning forever.